Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about a brand new headphone from Odyssey. This is the LCD S20, and it is a $500 closed-back headphone, of course using planar magnetic drivers. I was actually fortunate enough to travel to the Odyssey headquarters just last week, not only to ask a lot of questions about this headphone, but it also allowed me to listen to many other headphones from the Odyssey lineup that I haven't really heard before. You know, when you go to audio shows, it's nice to be able to demo stuff like a CanJam, but people are there and people can be quite loud. So these rooms were much more quiet. I had a whole selection of headphones, I had a whole selection of amps, and they had an abundance of S20s, which made it really easy for me to A/B a bunch of different things against it. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Now, Odyssey rates this headphone at 18 ohms of nominal impedance. And for those of you who are new to this, the 18 ohm rating in this case is a static ohm rating. A driver changes impedance typically from low frequencies to high, and that pattern is very unique based off the driver and the overall build of the headphone, and that's no different here. Now, planar magnetics are typically more linear than a dynamic driver, and that's kind of the case here, but I actually got a lower impedance initially, and then it peaked up closer to 50 ohms as the frequency went up. So I do measure that electrically, and that picture helps kind of depict of what it looks like. What this basically means is with only adding about 20 or 30 ohms of impedance from the lowest point, even if you have a high output impedance amplifier, it's not going to change it drastically. However, this being slightly opposite of what I normally see with dynamics, having a high output impedance amp, it will basically shift it to be a little bit brighter and a little bit bass forward, which isn't necessarily a bad thing with this headphone, but I wanted to point that out. And we'll get into sound quality soon. I just wanted to cover a very important detail on that spec. As far as what you get in the box, I want to show you the bottom. Now, this is terminated with 3.5 millimeter, which can be misleading because people will just use their own cables a lot. You know, a lot of Meze Audio, HiFiMan, some like the ZMF Bokeh uses this, even Aoun. But this is a single entry headphone, just like the MM100 was. So the cable plugs in on either side, and then the headphone will automatically still put the left and right driver with the appropriate sound. It's not like you have to flip the signal on your computer or anything. It's a rather long cable. This is just like the MM100 again. It's a shiny jacket, didn't really have any microphonics issues, and it helps that the placement of the jack angles the cable forward, which is nice. It comes with a really robust step down adapter. So this is going to take your 1/4 inch or 6.3 millimeter, really strong connection. So make sure you push that nice and firm, and that gives me the 3.5 millimeter on the other end. Now, because this is a single 3.5 millimeter entry for either side, you can use this wonderful little microphone, and that is the V-Moda Mic Boom, which sells for only $20. It's really inexpensive, and it actually sounds really nice. Also gives you a volume wheel on the side and a slider for your mic mute. Because the way this microphone works, it's not omnidirectional. You have to use the left ear cup for your plug. And now you just turn this into not only a gaming headset, but if you're working from home and you want to use this for work during the day, maybe you have a laptop with a combo port, you can use this cable instead, and now you have an awesome headphone for both work and play. The design of the LCD S20 might look familiar as well. It has the same headband design as the MM100 and basically the same as the Odyssey Maxwell that came before it. This is a good and a bad thing. I'm sure it helps keep the cost down. I wasn't a huge fan of the design of this headband only because depending on your head shape, you get less sizing options. This isn't bad. It fits me fine. I just know that some people wanted more adjustment. So you have basically 3 sets of holes here, and you can use this asymmetrically. It's not like if you go to the smallest hole up top on the left side that you have to do it to the right. You can basically kind of adjust it as you see fit. This also means that aftermarket straps that are meant for both the Maxwell and the MM100 will still work with the LCD S20. The LCD S20 is a little bit on the heavier side as well. It weighs 546 grams on my scale. Not the heaviest Odyssey headphone by any means, but if you compared it to an all-plastic build from another competitor, it's going to feel more heavy. It also feels more premium though. The build quality is fantastic. This rotating yoke, if you will, feels really solid in hand, and this entire fork system is metal. It has a mix of plastic and metal on the headband, and then you have this, you know, traditional synthetic looking leather strap. Now, what's really cool about this particular design is the cups or the pads themselves, because they're magnetic. How amazing is this? This is the first time I've seen an Odyssey headphone use a magnetic mount. It's very easy to service this way. That was intentional because they wanted to make it easy if you got new pads later. It's just a more consistent mechanism. Now, this whole thing is like a foam gasket to help kind of maintain a strong seal. I do want to point out two things on this note. You can see that it snaps in no problem. Well, if I turn it because it's round, it doesn't snap in because the polarity of the magnets are going to prevent that. However, I can snap it in backwards. Now these pads are tapered. They have a large opening on them, and I don't mind the pad dimensions at all. It might look a little bit shallow to some. I measured about 20 millimeters on the front and 28 in the back as far as depth goes. But because you can flip this and it's asymmetrical, make sure you don't put it on backwards like that. Otherwise, it's angling the driver the wrong way, and that's not going to be as comfortable for your ear. Your ear will likely touch the baffle. So just check that in case you ever took them off. Now there is one characteristic that is special to the S20. This is going to be a technology you'll see in more Odyssey products going forward, and it debuted with the Carbon 2 just last year, and that is called SLAM technology. SLAM is short for Synthetic Linear Acoustic Modulator. In simple terms, it's basically a front bass port, and this little hole right here, when I put the pad on, you can see that that is still vented right there. And if I take it off, you can see how this has a little channel and it bleeds into the inside of the driver cup, or like the actual mounting of the driver. This is to help free up bass response, because when you deal with a closed back, you have an inconsistent amount of pressure for different heads, and the pressure that builds up on the inside can affect the way the driver behaves, and it often can negatively impact bass response. And that's why a lot of open backs, even if they measure to have less bass, a lot of times the bass just sounds better. So by reducing the acoustic resistance of the actual design, you have a much more consistent bass delivery. And the SLAM technology, I'm sure they found a word to make it sound like, so it can be translated to slam, because that is the goal. It is to have more bass slam and make it sound more punchy and dynamic. The other benefit of this is because it's relieving pressure on the inside ear volume, you also don't have that driver crinkle pressure anymore either. If you've ever had a closed back planar magnetic headphone, whether it's the Maxwell or another brand, if you put too much pressure on it, by design, you can hear driver crinkle. That's just because the diaphragm is incredibly thin, and any pressure on that, just think of like, in a simple terms, aluminum foil. If you blow on it, you're going to hear like little crinkling. This is that, but it's even thinner. So by having a bass port and relieving that pressure, every time you take it on and off and put it on, even if you push, no driver crinkle whatsoever. I already mentioned this. Here's the chassis design of the Maxwell and the MM100. That hasn't been a problem for me. It might be a problem for some people out there because the sizing kind of have to work out for your head shape. It's been very comfortable for me. The synthetic strap on here is quite flexible. I think it's more flexible than some other straps like this. Obviously, it's not stretchy, but it does have some give to it, and it creates a soft spot on the top of your head. So even though this weighs just over 500 grams, I didn't find it too unwieldy. More of the weight is actually coming from the cups themselves, of course, so that will affect clamp force. This is a little bit clampier than some other headphones, but it's not as extreme as other Odyssey headphones either. You know, I'm just over 600 grams of clamp force, so it's fairly moderate, and as a result, I can wear this for quite a long time, even if it's using the leatherette pads. It's still quite comfortable for me. Now, while I'm wearing this, I want to mention one other critical thing about the S20, and that is passive noise isolation. These have an insane ability to block out noise, and you would think that by having a bass port to vent internal volume that maybe it would be a little bit more leaky, and it's not. This is easily some of the best passive noise isolation I've heard on any sub-$1,000 headphone, probably even beyond. It's class leading, and the only other one that I've found that is remotely close to this is the Sennheiser HD620S. Great headphone. I'll make some comparisons to that one later, but the noise isolation is that good. It's significantly more isolating than even the FiiO FT1. Anything I've used from Beyerdynamic, the Aeon SR7000, which is their closed back. So passive noise isolation is excellent as well. And again, comfort might not be for everybody, but for me, it was quite comfortable. All right, so let's get into sound quality, and we're going to start with the objective side first to take my opinion out of it. It's just going to show you how my rig measures it. My rig is not your ear, so keep in mind, even though my rig might display it a certain way, that doesn't mean that's how you're going to hear it. This is just an approximate of one rig, and I've measured many other headphones on the same rig, so I will have a link in the description below so you can take a look and compare this frequency response against others. Having said that, the frequency response is very good in the bass region. You can see it's pretty adherent and close to the Harman curve as far as having a nice subtle bass shelf, and it does carry into the upper bass region a little bit, so the LCD S20 has a little bit more warmth to it. Now that warmth is exaggerated by the mid-range and treble tuning. Mid-range is quite good. It doesn't really sound too unnatural to me. There is a little bit of a lift at 2000 hertz, which I'll translate into on the subjective sound quality stuff. But this can, if it's too forward, can create a little bit of a nasally or shouty sensation, but it's not shouty in comparison to something like the Dan Clark E3, which was a little bit more forward sounding to me in that area. Now with this particular model and with many other closebacks, especially on planar magnetic closebacks, is there is a big recess after 3000 hertz. It dips quite a bit and it kind of carries into a huge chunk of the low treble area. Basically the entire presence region is recessed, and then you have a little bit more treble emphasis up top, at least especially in comparison to the recess you have in the low and mid treble. This makes this headphone sound a little bit dark and warm. If you're chasing that, then you'll be happy with that kind of tuning. The only downside of having a dark treble tuning to this level is it can make some things sound less resolving and detailed. So if you're looking for a super analytical headphone, this, as it comes out of the box, is not going to deliver that sound profile. One more thing to point out on the measurements is you can see the left and right channel matching is amazing on the S20. This helps with imaging performance and will impact gaming, which I'll talk about soon. But having this tight of a frequency response, at least on my unit, is going to be very helpful for positioning audio cues from the left and right driver. Getting into sound quality, there's going to be a lot to unpack here, and I'm going to make a lot of comparisons to other headphones shortly as well. The frequency response is one thing, and then how you hear it is something else. And it is fairly close to how my rig is measuring it for what I hear. This does have a warm presentation and it does have a dark treble presentation. The big focus, though, I want to start with is the bass, because this SLAM technology is no joke. If you feel like you've just been craving a bassy headphone in general, but not like mud bass where it just makes everything sound like crap, this is bass done right. Especially in this price range, there really aren't any closebacks that I've heard around this price, especially on planars. It doesn't really exist until you spend at least $1,000 for a Dan Clark. But the bass extension on this, the tactility and the bass quality is amazing on the S20. Now, part of it is the tuning, and I didn't find it to sound as punchy as like the Sony MDR M1 or even the Beyerdynamic DT700 Pro X. Those have a little bit more of a kick to it. This has just slightly more of a thump, but the low bass detail and texture is unworldly good. Like if you're watching a lot of movies and you want a headphone for that, that sub bass is like a game changer. And then if you need passive noise isolation, there really aren't any headphones that approach this level of bass extension. So to me, the biggest selling point of this headphone is if you're craving more quality bass and you don't want to spend thousands of dollars. Now, it's not all sunshine and roses though, because as great as the bass is, the upper mid-range and low treble tuning is going to be where everyone is going to have a very different opinion on the LCD S20. I think a lot of people will agree it's dark sounding, but not everybody will love or hate the sound. And because of that, what happens is this slight lift at 2000 hertz can occasionally create a slightly nasally or pinched sound. It didn't come across as overly shouty, but it did compress that area just a little bit because this emphasis at 2K is followed by a bit of a recession in the presence region. So that makes that peak sound a little bit more prominent as a result. I thought the Dan Clark E3 sounded just slightly more shouty to me. It was also a more energetic sounding headphone in general because it didn't have anywhere close to the same scoop of this. This is actually more closely tuned to the Sony MDR M1 as far as that mid-range presence is. The Sony just has a little bit more treble to kind of fill it in, so it doesn't come across as dark. I think because of the way this is tuned, your listening experience will vary depending on the songs you listen to. But one example is Ill What I Bleed by Kid Cudi. I use that song for a lot of bass testing because it showcases not only like the punch, but how much bass and extension, the sub bass extension it can have. And this definitely stands out as an all-star. To put it in perspective, I have about 6 or 7 other closebacks I was being against with this to do this review. And that song on this was incredible. Like, it destroyed basically every other headphone. It was a fun rival by the FiiO FT1 and the Sony MDR M1. I think they're the only two that could really keep up with that kind of a bass hit. But this really showcased that whole slam tech and what Odyssey was going for. Conversely, I was listening to the song Smoke and Love by Stick Figure, which has kind of a nasally voice in the first place. I love their music, but his voice is very unique, and that kind of showcases some of the qualities I didn't like on the S20 as much. It sounded even more pinched, and because of that recess, a lot of the trailing tones were lacking, so I felt like part of the song was missing a little bit. It's wild how different songs will behave when you have a tuning like this, because sometimes it can hide or accentuate some things. One benefit of this kind of tuning is it's more relaxing to listen to, so there's never any punishing sound notes that are coming from it. So if you're listening to a lot of rock, or if you listen to it at a slightly louder volume, this doesn't have a fatiguing presentation. So if you listen to a lot of headphones that are almost too analytical, maybe you have a couple Hi-Fi Man headphones that are more brightly tuned, or something that's just very neutral and bright in general, and you just want a totally different flavor without essentially sounding terrible, this is the kind of headphone you're looking for. It's kind of like dark done right to an extent. Obviously EQ is going to go a long way, I'll get into that, but even without it, the summary of this is considered a warm sounding headphone with a very dark upper mid low treble presentation. Now the high treble is extended a little bit, or it's emphasized slightly in comparison to the rest of the treble tuning, so it doesn't sound overly congested and centered. Voices will be a little bit softer and more centered, but there are still a lot of good musical notes that have a lot of width to them and separation. So it's a headphone that, depending on what track you listen to, it can still sound quite wide, even though it's a closed back. And that's just, again, it's a byproduct of how the tuning works in general. Now, gaming performance surprised me a ton. I didn't think this kind of sound profile and this tuning would be super competitive with gaming, but, you know, I'm just going to ignore the measurements for a sec and talk about my gaming experience. So the S20 has one huge advantage going for it that a lot of the other headphones don't have, and that's the noise isolation, because blocking out your PC fan noise, other ambient sounds in the room, is going to give you a competitive advantage if you're playing FPS games, because you always want to hear the most subtle details. And the more you block out the external noises, the more competitive any headphone would be if they had the same tuning. Now, this particular tuning had some good weight on the bass notes, and for whatever reason, when explosions were happening, you're firing a gun, etc., because it was so recessed in that 4 to 6K area, gunshots weren't as loud, and if you're tracking footsteps with a lot of noise, this still was able to clearly demonstrate where a lot of those footstep cues were coming from. Now, personally, I do EQ, and I do still prefer to EQ this a little bit, just as I would with any headphone. It really doesn't matter how it measures. I've always added some form of EQ. So because of that, you can make it essentially close to perfect. And to put this further in perspective, this beat a couple of my other favorites. There's only a couple that I would really put on the same level of this for FPS in like the sub $500 closeback range that's not intended to be a gaming headset. Like the VZR Model 1 to me needs EQ as well, but that one still has excellent imaging performance, so that's kind of a wild card there. As far as like general mainstream headphones go, the FiiO FT1 I would put in 3rd or 4th place. The Beyerdynamic the DT700 Pro X has actually been one of my top sub $300 picks for gaming on a closeback, because if you need noise isolation, I like the way it's tuned. It doesn't have the same treble peak that the DT1770 Pro Mark II has, so to me it was just an easier headphone to listen to. So, but that one I would easily put in like 2nd or 3rd. These fluctuate a little bit depending on the game you play. And the Own or Aoun SR7000 to me had a really good balance of bass impact, imaging performance, and detail retrieval. This was up there with the best. And it beat the Beyerdynamic in the FiiO, which again, I wasn't expecting. That's without even doing EQ. Once you start playing around with that and you add your microphone, it's a genuine contender in the gaming space. And conversely, if you don't care about competitive play, that's good too. You can use this for immersive gaming. If you recall having a more relaxed sound profile and really strong bass extension, this is awesome for open world, single player, more casual type games. That immersion is amazing, and that relaxed sound presentation is just such a good listen to at night. And because the upper treble is just a little bit emphasized in comparison to the low treble, then your environmental effects can still have some breath to it. You know, if there's wind or rain happening, it still opens it up a little bit and you get a wider image than you'd expect. Now, I am going to do my best to compress a lot of this information into a very short and concise chapter. Wish me luck. So first, I want to start with the LCD XC, which I will do more dedicated reviews on. I've discussed it in a lot of other videos, but I don't know if I ever discussed this exclusively. The LCD XC is the polar opposite of the S20. It has a lot leaner bass presentation, and it sounds more analytical and bright sounding. So if you want an Odyssey headphone and you want the ability to do some EQ, but you don't like how this is being portrayed as far as dark and heavy bass, maybe consider the XC. It is more expensive at over $1,000. It's also a little bit heavier, even though it has carbon fiber cups, but very different sound profile. So I just wanted to bring it out to mention that. I can tell you the bass performance is so good on the S20. I would much rather prefer to EQ this because I can't get the XC bass to do what this does. That's how incredibly efficient that SlamTech is, or whatever else they did to that particular driver. Now, I don't have these laid out in any particular order, so I'm just going to go down the line and help save some time that way. So the first is the FiiO FT1, and keep in mind, prices are likely going to be fluctuating this year. So you decide what makes sense to you for your budget based off current market prices at the time of reviewing or purchasing. But the FiiO FT1 is a fantastic headphone. At the debut price of close to $150, I think the tuning just knocked it out of the park. It's what a lot of people are looking for. Decent enough looks, build quality, walnut cups, even has a beechwood version that's a little bit lighter in color, but it has a nice traditional V shape. It's got a good bass punch to it. It's much brighter and more forward sounding. So if you're chasing a little bit more energy, even though this is a lot less expensive, it's still a good headphone. And it doesn't really need as much EQ out of the box. If I am to be honest, it doesn't have the same power handling as the S20 though. So if you like to push it to louder volumes with a lot of bass, the S20 is one of the things you're paying for in that regard, is the power handling. Now the OWN SR7000 is the imaging king here as far as I'm concerned. It has an amazing balance of good bass performance, the detail separation and stage. So if you play a lot of stuff where you want to hear audio cues kind of thrown out as widely as possible, this is the closed back that thinks it's more of an open back. And the passive noise isolation is decent, not class leading. It's beat by the S20 and the Sennheiser for sure. And I think even the FiiO and the Sony MDR M1 will give it a run for the money. Wonderful headphone though, dual 3.5 terminated, extremely comfortable to wear. Again, it doesn't have the same bass handling as this if you like to play it louder with a bass shell, but really fun to listen to headphone. Now, these guys are quite different. So you have the DT700 Pro X, which again, I mentioned earlier on the gaming chapter. I love the tuning of this. It's not a particularly high res sounding headphone. It doesn't sound like a really expensive headphone. You can tell it's a sub $300 headphone, and it is. So it's kind of one of those things where, yeah, it's less, but it sounds like less, if that makes sense. I still find it very comfortable. I like the build quality. It has a single mini XLR connection on it. Passive noise isolation is good. I actually like the comfort because these ear pads are just so soft. And I actually like the tuning more than the DT1770 Pro Mark II, which is significantly more expensive. This has more detail retrieval and better detail separation. So if you're chasing a more nuanced analytical sound, the 1770 Pro Mark II is a better headphone in that regard compared to the 700 Pro X. The biggest issue I have is this has a really strong biodynamic peak at 8,000 hertz, and it's, for me, almost unlistenable without doing EQ. I'm really sensitive to that peak, and it just cuts right through me. I would much rather deal with listening to this without EQ because it's not doing anything that's hurting my ears. So not a bad headphone by any means. Bass punch and tactility is good. Their new driver that they put in the new models actually handles EQ better than their older stuff. But again, if you're chasing bass, it's going to keep coming back to the S20 just to not keep bringing that up. Then you have the HD620S, which is a pretty unique headphone because it has a couple things going for it. One, I think it's so well made. It doesn't come across as like anything crazy because there's obviously a lot of plastic here, but it is lighter. One of the advantages is the price. It's only $300, and it has the highest passive noise isolation here, effectively tied with the Odyssey LCD S20. I can't do instrumented testing for noise isolation, and even if I could, your head shape can change that a little bit. Love the sound isolation. This is the widest staging sounding headphone here. I'd say it kind of compares to the Aoun SR7000, but it does not have the same bass depth of almost any other headphone here. Regardless of what the frequency response shows, it doesn't sound as punchy or strong to me. So if you're okay with a more neutral sound and you want a wider presentation, the vocals are a little bit thinner sounding on the HD620S as well, but really good imaging performance, good passive noise isolation, build quality, and to me the comfort is nice too. The Sony is just like my favorite little dark horse, I guess. I just love how basic this headphone is, and I'm not taking away for what it does well, because it looks cheaper than it is. It's a more expensive headphone than you'd expect, but I just think the bass is so much fun. It's actually ported on top, even though it's a nice little close back. Sony knows how to do some good bass, at least in this regard, and I've just loved how lightweight this is. It's not like crazy, as I put it on backwards, it's not like crazy in terms of design. Like, you feel the pressure point in the center. My ears are touching the baffle inside. I wish the cups were bigger, but it's kind of like the closest thing to the S20 as far as tuning goes, having a strong bass shelf, a nice relaxed mid-range presentation, but it just has a little bit more treble, so it has a little bit more sparkle to it. Really, really fun headphone. Surprising amount of bass handling. It just feels kind of cheap. It's not as comfortable, but you're paying less. The big difference too is if you were to tune these two headphones to have the exact same frequency response, the S20 is going to do a better job at resolving subtle details and separating instruments more. So that kind of brings me to the conclusion of the S20. Okay, so we made it to the end of the video, and I hope you found it helpful. I do want to give a huge thanks to Odyssey for sending this to me for review without soliciting any particular feedback in advance. They had no idea what I was going to say. I did admittedly tell them I thought it was a very bassy, somewhat dark, relaxed sounding headphone. Obviously, they let me kind of say whatever I want in the review. So I hope you found this helpful. I know a lot of us collect headphones and we have more than one, but for those who are just looking for that special one, my goal is to always help give you the best idea of comparisons I can for a lot of other excellent models on the market. And I think the LCD S20 has earned a good spot at its price range because of the unique benefits of having that very high EQ ability, wonderful bass texture, and you still get a really good bass quality. I already talked about the microphone upgrade if you want to do that. And I love that they switched to a magnetic pad mount. That's pretty cool too. So with that being said, thanks so much for making it to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already so I can see it some upcoming videos. Really appreciate you checking out the video. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye.